On a warm September evening in 2008, in the heart of Shreveport, Louisiana, a young woman named Tavia Sills vanished without a trace. The 18-year-old, 5 months pregnant, was last seen walking through the quiet streets of her neighborhood. Her disappearance would set off a series of events that would shake a community to its core, unravel a devastating truth, and change the lives of many forever. For days the search for Tavia seemed endless. Her family, friends, and local authorities combed the streets, the parks, and the back alleys of Shreveport in search of answers. As the days dragged on, a sense of hopelessness began to take hold. And then 3 days later, a body was discovered. It was found in a remote pond in Shreveport's Martin Luther King Jr. neighborhood, an area far from the bustling heart of the city. Tavia Sills, still carrying the child she had been so excited to welcome into the world, was found lifeless, her life cruelly taken. The crime scene told a chilling story. She had been shot. But the true horror didn't end there. The investigation would reveal that the person who took her life wasn't just any stranger. It was someone who had once shared her life, her trust, and her love. Lamondra Marks Tucker, her ex-boyfriend, became the center of the investigation. The twists that would soon unfold would shock everyone involved. Tucker, it was later revealed, had been consumed by a toxic jealousy that blurred the lines between love and obsession. He believed that the child Tavia was carrying was his, a belief that would ultimately fuel his rage and lead to the tragic end of a young woman's life. What came next wasn't just a story about a horrific crime. It was about the heartbreaking revelation of the truth. DNA evidence would later confirm what many feared. The child Tavia carried wasn't Tucker's. But by then it was too late. The damage had been done. A life full of promise was cut short, and a mother would never get to hold her daughter in her arms again. This isn't just a story of murder. It's a story of love turned toxic, of rage gone unchecked, and of a young woman's life stolen too soon. How could someone who once loved her so much bring about her untimely death? What led a young man to believe that a life, not even his own, was worth taking? As the case went to trial, more shocking revelations emerged. Tucker's mother was implicated in a conspiracy to tamper with the jury, compounding the heartbreak of an already tragic story. And though justice would ultimately be served, with Tucker being sentenced to death, there are questions that still linger. Questions about the motivations behind his actions, the consequences of misguided emotions, and the devastating cost of a crime that should never have happened. Stay with us as we unravel the layers of this tragedy, a case that reveals not only the depths of human emotion but the devastating consequences of unchecked jealousy, revenge, and the search for answers in the wake of a life lost. This is the story of Tavia Sills, and it starts now. Tavia Sills was more than just a name in the tragic story that would soon unfold. She was a young woman with a bright future ahead of her, filled with the potential to live a life full of dreams, aspirations, and the love of her family. Born and raised in Shreveport, Louisiana, Tavia had always been known for her bubbly personality and infectious laugh. She was the type of person who could light up a room, and her friends and family spoke of her as a free spirit, someone who carried a warmth and kindness that made everyone around her feel comfortable and loved. At just 18 years old, Tavia was in the midst of discovering who she was and what she wanted from life. Like many young women, she had big plans for the future. She wanted to finish school, perhaps pursue a career in healthcare, and one day be a mother. That dream was becoming a reality when she discovered she was pregnant. Tavia was 5 months along when she went missing, and while the news of her pregnancy had come as a surprise, it was a surprise filled with hope. She was excited about the prospect of becoming a mother, a role she had always longed for, and was looking forward to what the future held for her and her baby. Her pregnancy marked a new chapter in her life. Despite the challenges that came with being a teen mother, She remained determined to give her child the best life possible. Her family was supportive, especially her mother, Vicky Britton, who stood by her through thick and thin. They had a close relationship, and Tavia often confided in her mother about her plans, her fears, and her hopes for the future. At the time of her disappearance, Tavia had been dating Lamondra Marks Tucker, a man she once believed she loved. Tucker was older than her, and they had been together on and off for several months. Their relationship, like many young relationships, was filled with highs and lows. However, as time went on, it became clear that Tucker's emotional attachment to Tavia wasn't as healthy as it appeared. There were signs of possessiveness, jealousy, and controlling behavior, but Tavia, in her youthful innocence and hopefulness, didn't see the warning signs that would later become all too clear. Her family had noticed the changes in her as well. Tavia, once full of life and optimism, began to withdraw, particularly when it came to Tucker. She had confided in her friends that things were not as they seemed, but she wasn't ready to let go. The conflicting emotions she had for Tucker, love, fear, doubt, made it difficult for her to move on from the relationship. It was in this turbulent, unstable environment that she found herself pregnant. Tucker, in particular, seemed to believe that their child would be the glue that held their relationship together, but his possessiveness only worsened as Tavia's pregnancy progressed. Throughout her pregnancy, Tavia's friends and family continued to show support. They helped her prepare for motherhood, offering advice, baby clothes, and words of encouragement. But behind closed doors, the tension between her and Tucker was growing. Tavia's personal struggles, alongside her excitement about becoming a mother, weighed heavily on her. She wanted to make the right decisions, not just for herself but for the child she was about to bring into the world. But as much as she tried to keep things together, it was clear that her relationship with Tucker was becoming more and more toxic. Despite the tumultuous nature of her relationship, Tavia was still hopeful. Her family recalls moments where she spoke fondly of her future with the baby, planning the kind of life she hoped to give her child. One full of love and support, something she had always dreamed of herself. Tavia was determined to be a good mother, and she was ready to embrace the challenges and joys that came with motherhood. She may have been young, but her desire to build a future was undeniable. The weeks leading up to her disappearance were marked by moments of joy mixed with uncertainty. She had spent time with friends and family, preparing for the baby's arrival, and was even looking forward to picking out a name. Yet deep down there was an undercurrent of unease. The relationship with Tucker had become more complicated as he began to show signs of jealousy over her pregnancy, believing that the child was his. But the truth, one that Tucker was not yet aware of, was that the child Tavia carried wasn't his at all. The relationship and the drama surrounding it were about to take a dark turn. Tavia, at 18, was on the cusp of adulthood, filled with dreams and aspirations, yet caught in the grip of a relationship that was becoming more dangerous by the day. The story of her life, though tragically cut short, is a reminder of the vulnerability of youth, the complexities of love and relationships, and the profound impact that family and support networks can have in a young person's life. She may have been young, but she was ready to embrace the future. If only it hadn't been stolen from her so soon. It is in these moments, captured by those who loved her, that Tavia's true legacy is remembered. A young woman who had the world at her feet, who longed to be a mother, and who was caught in a tragic web of love and jealousy that would ultimately cost her everything. Tavia Sills and Lamondra Marks Tucker's relationship was anything but ordinary. On the surface, they seemed like any young couple navigating the ups and downs of a typical teenage romance. But beneath the surface, there were darker forces at play, and their relationship was far more complex than anyone could have imagined. Tavia and Tucker's relationship began with the typical whirlwind romance. Tavia, at just 17, was drawn to Tucker, an older man who seemed to offer her a sense of security and affection. At first, things seemed normal, perhaps even promising. Tucker was charismatic and, at times, affectionate. But as the months went by, cracks began to show. There were moments of warmth followed by bouts of jealousy and possessiveness. Tucker's control over Tavia slowly started to tighten, and Tavia, feeling vulnerable and uncertain about her future, found herself tangled in a relationship that she couldn't easily escape. Tavia's pregnancy, which should have been a time of joy and excitement, became a point of contention in their relationship. Tucker, in particular, was fixated on the child she was carrying. He believed the child was his, a belief that would eventually consume him. While Tavia had tried to keep her independence and her focus on preparing for motherhood, Tucker's growing obsession over the pregnancy soon turned into something much more sinister. His jealousy, already a feature of their relationship, reached dangerous levels. As her belly began to show and the reality of motherhood loomed closer, Tucker's possessiveness deepened, as though he saw the baby as the ultimate claim over Tavia, a final bond that could tether her to him forever. Tavia, in her youth and naivete, struggled to separate love from control. Though she confided in her family about her concerns, she never quite gathered the courage to break free of Tucker's hold. He was persistent. His promises of a future together, a family, and a life built on their love kept her attached. But Tavia's hesitation to fully trust him, especially as her due date drew closer, created a tense undercurrent in their relationship. She feared the growing distance between her desires and Tucker's demands. The tension reached its peak as her due date approached. Tucker's jealousy, fueled by his belief that the child was his, became increasingly apparent. Friends and family recalled moments when Tucker would show up unexpectedly, demanding to know where Tavia had been, questioning her every move. She had become increasingly isolated, with Tucker becoming more possessive and controlling as the pregnancy progressed. Tavia's friends noticed her growing anxiety and confusion. She began to avoid social gatherings, feeling that Tucker's presence was more of a command than a choice. His distrust deepened, and the tension in their relationship reached a breaking point. The emotional toll on Tavia was undeniable. Though she wanted to shield her child from the chaos that had surrounded her relationship, she was also caught in a cycle of fear and dependence. For a young woman trying to embrace motherhood, this was a nightmare that she was struggling to navigate. Her mother, Vicky Britton, noticed the strain on her daughter's face and in her actions. But like so many victims of abusive relationships, Tavia didn't speak up, perhaps too afraid to admit how bad things had gotten. Tucker, on the other hand, never made it clear that he had no intention of supporting her or her pregnancy. The reality of their relationship was one built on lies, control, and manipulation. On the day Tavia went missing, the situation had escalated to a point where Tavia could no longer conceal the cracks in their relationship. Tucker had become more erratic, and the growing resentment between them was too much for her to manage. Whether Tavia planned to break up with Tucker that day or whether something else was at play, she never got the chance to take control of her own life again. That morning, as she went about her day, she had no idea that it would be the last time anyone would see her alive. Tucker, for his part, had already made plans. He had reached a point where his obsession with Tavia and the belief that the baby was his child overshadowed any sense of rationality. Anger had taken hold of him, and he was now desperate to keep Tavia tied to him in a way that seemed to him the only solution to his growing paranoia. When he discovered that Tavia had planned to move on, either from their relationship or from him personally, he became enraged. Tucker, who had harbored a growing resentment toward Tavia for weeks, snapped. Whether the murder was premeditated or the result of a sudden burst of violence is still a matter of speculation. But the tragic result was the same. Tavia's life was brutally cut short. On September 9, 2008, Tavia went missing and her family immediately feared the worst. Friends and family knew the relationship between her and Tucker had been volatile, but they couldn't imagine it would end in the way it did. 4 days the search for Tavia consumed Shreveport, but it wasn't until September 12, 2008, that her body was found in a pond in a remote part of the Martin Luther King Jr. neighborhood. The discovery of her lifeless body sent shockwaves through the community and the entire family. The horror was unimaginable. The young woman who had been so full of potential and excitement was gone, taken not by an accident but by the hand of someone she had once trusted. In the aftermath of the discovery, investigators quickly zeroed in on Tucker. His conflicting statements, erratic behavior, and his deep attachment to the pregnancy raised red flags. Soon the evidence began to mount, and it became clear that Tucker had played a central role in Tavia's disappearance and death. What was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter for Tavia, a chapter that would include motherhood and hope, ended tragically, leaving a family shattered and a community in shock. The murder of Tavia Sills wasn't just a senseless act of violence. It was the devastating consequence of obsession, manipulation, and jealousy gone too far. Tucker's inability to accept reality, compounded by his emotional turmoil, resulted in a loss that no one could have prepared for. The tragedy of her death is a stark reminder of the dangers of unhealthy relationships, and of how love, when twisted by control and jealousy, can turn deadly. The investigation into the murder of Tavia Sills began almost immediately after her body was discovered in the pond on September 12, 2008. The Shreveport Police Department, along with other local law enforcement agencies, quickly shifted their focus to finding out what had happened to this young woman, and more importantly, who was responsible for her death. As the evidence mounted, one name emerged repeatedly in the investigation: Lamondra Marks Tucker, Tavia's ex-boyfriend. From the beginning, there were questions surrounding Tucker's behavior. Law enforcement began to piece together a timeline of the events leading up to Tavia's disappearance. They learned that the couple had been in a tumultuous relationship, marked by jealousy and controlling behavior, particularly on Tucker's part. Friends and family of Tavia were interviewed, and the more they spoke, the more alarming the situation appeared. Several people described Tucker as possessive, even manipulative, and they recalled multiple instances where he exhibited outbursts of anger when Tavia tried to distance herself from him. Tavia's reluctance to speak openly about her relationship with Tucker made it difficult for those around her to fully understand how dire the situation had become, but it was clear to investigators that the tension between the two had escalated before her tragic death. The police learned that just days before Tavia went missing, she and Tucker had been arguing. It was around this time that Tucker became fixated on the belief that the child Tavia was carrying was his, despite the fact that they had already broken up. His obsession over the pregnancy seemed to amplify his emotional volatility, and it was in this environment of escalating tension that Tavia's life was ultimately taken. Investigators could tell from the very beginning that this wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a crime fueled by a toxic, obsessive relationship. As law enforcement closed in on Tucker, their attention turned to the details surrounding the day Tavia went missing. They discovered that Tucker had been one of the last people seen with her. His statements about the day she disappeared were inconsistent, raising further suspicions. Tucker's behavior immediately after the murder was also telling. He didn't seem to show the type of remorse or shock one would expect from someone who had just lost their partner. Instead, he seemed more focused on his own narrative, attempting to distance himself from the crime by offering various explanations about where he had been and what he had done that day. One of the most significant breakthroughs in the investigation came from the forensic evidence. Police obtained a search warrant for Tucker's home and car, and during the search, they uncovered a series of items that would play a pivotal role in the case. The most damning piece of evidence was the DNA test. Despite Tucker's insistence that he was the father of Tavia's unborn child, DNA results revealed that he was not the biological father. This revelation had profound implications for the case. It showed that Tucker's entire motive for murder was based on a false assumption. His emotional reaction to the news of the pregnancy was one of possessiveness and entitlement, a belief that was rooted in nothing but his own insecurities and jealousy. The DNA test results were a game changer, confirming what many had suspected. The murder was driven not by love, but by obsession. Law enforcement also turned their attention to Tucker's interactions with others in the days following Tavia's disappearance. His behavior had become increasingly erratic, and witnesses recalled seeing him acting strangely, as though he was avoiding questions or trying to cover his tracks. One of the most unsettling aspects of the investigation was the involvement of Tucker's mother. In a shocking twist, it was revealed that Tucker's mother, along with a man named Marcus Taylor, had attempted to tamper with the jury in the upcoming trial. The conspiracy to influence the judicial process added another layer of complexity to the case and led to additional charges against Tucker's mother. Marcus Taylor, who was believed to have helped Tucker in the murder, was also implicated in the case. His involvement seemed to go beyond merely being an accomplice. He was charged with second-degree murder, and his role in the crime was still being examined by investigators. Taylor's connection to Tucker was another troubling piece of the puzzle that would soon come together as the investigation continued. Throughout the investigation, there was a deep sense of urgency. The Shreveport Police Department, working alongside the Caddo Parish District Attorney's Office, was determined to bring justice to Tavia and her family. With each passing day, more details emerged about the toxic nature of Tavia and Tucker's relationship, and the evidence against him continued to build. The involvement of Tucker's mother in the conspiracy to tamper with the jury only deepened the complexity of the case, as it became clear that the Sills family wasn't just fighting for justice for Tavia. They were fighting against a network of deceit and manipulation. Tavia's family, particularly her mother Vicki Britton, was devastated by the constant delays and complications in the case. They had already suffered the unimaginable loss of their daughter, and the slow pace of the investigation added a sense of hopelessness. But through it all, Vicki remained resolute. She was determined to see Tucker held accountable for his actions, and to ensure that her daughter's memory would not be overshadowed by the man who had taken her life. Vicki's strength and courage were undeniable, even in the face of the immense grief she was experiencing. As the investigation progressed, it became apparent that this was not just a case about a murder. It was a case about the destruction of a young woman's life at the hands of someone who was supposed to love her. It was about the power of jealousy and obsession, and the devastating consequences that can come when those emotions go unchecked. For Tavia Sills, her life was stolen by someone who could not accept the reality of their relationship. And as the investigation continued to unfold, the true horrors of that relationship began to come to light. The search for justice was far from over, but each new piece of evidence, each revelation about Tucker's behavior and motivations, brought the case one step closer to its tragic conclusion. The investigation into Tavia Sills' death was a race against time, but as the truth began to emerge, it became clear that this was a crime that had been driven not just by anger, but by a profound misunderstanding of love itself. And in the end, it would be the pursuit of justice that would give Tavia's family the closure they so desperately needed, even as they faced the painful reality of their loss. The road to justice for Tavia Sills was long and emotionally grueling, and it all came to a head during the trial of Lamondra Marks Tucker. What was initially perceived as a straightforward case of murder quickly became a complex web of deception, manipulation, and intense emotional battles. The trial not only uncovered the chilling details of Tavia's murder but also highlighted the deep psychological struggles that Tucker had been grappling with, a mix of obsession, possessiveness, and anger that ultimately led to a young woman's tragic death. Lamondra Tucker's trial began in early 2009, just a few months after Tavia's body had been found. As the case made its way to the courtroom, the public's attention was immediately drawn to the shocking nature of the crime. Tavia was a young, pregnant teenager whose life was stolen from her, and now the person responsible for her death was about to face the legal system. The question on everyone's mind was whether justice would be served. The prosecution's case was built on solid evidence, including the damning DNA test results that confirmed Tucker was not the father of Tavia's unborn child. This revelation was the linchpin of the prosecution's argument. It painted a clear picture of how Tucker's jealousy and obsession had driven him to murder a woman he believed had betrayed him. The DNA results were not just an eye-opening piece of forensic evidence, but also a heartbreaking reminder that Tavia's death was the result of a belief based entirely on lies. Tucker's reaction to the results only deepened the prosecution's case, revealing his inability to confront the reality of the situation. Instead of feeling remorse, he became even more enraged, adding to the list of reasons why he was unfit to remain free. During the trial, the prosecution methodically presented the evidence against Tucker. Witnesses were brought forward who testified about the toxic nature of Tucker and Tavia's relationship, recounting stories of his possessiveness, jealousy, and attempts to control her. Friends of Tavia spoke about how she had confided in them about the struggles in her relationship with Tucker, how she had felt trapped and afraid. They described the emotional manipulation she endured and how her once vibrant personality had slowly dulled under the weight of his behavior. The investigation also uncovered Tucker's attempts to mislead law enforcement during the days following Tavia's disappearance. His inconsistent statements about his whereabouts, his erratic behavior, and his failure to show any genuine remorse painted him as someone more focused on covering his tracks than on showing empathy for the loss of his ex-girlfriend. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Tucker remained stubbornly defiant, maintaining that he was not responsible for Tavia's death. His refusal to take accountability only further aggravated the emotional toll on Tavia's family and friends, who had to sit through each day of the trial and relive the horror of their loved one's final moments. The emotional weight of the case was further magnified when Tavia's mother, Vicki Britton, took the stand. Vicki's testimony was nothing short of heartbreaking. She spoke of her daughter's dreams, her hopes for the future, and the devastation of losing her in such a violent, senseless manner. Her voice trembled as she described the pain of losing both her daughter and the unborn grandchild she had been so excited to welcome into the world. In a poignant moment, Vicki spoke about the forgiveness she had found in her heart for Tucker, despite the anguish he had caused her family. She explained how, for her own peace of mind, she had chosen to forgive him, but it did not mean she would ever forget what he had done. This display of strength and grace, even in the face of unimaginable pain, left an indelible mark on those in the courtroom. The defense, on the other hand, struggled to present a convincing argument. They tried to paint Tucker as someone who had been consumed by the emotional chaos of the situation, making the case that his actions were not premeditated but driven by a momentary loss of control. They tried to appeal to the jury's sense of empathy, painting Tucker as a man who had been hurt by the revelation that Tavia was carrying another man's child, a man he thought he loved. However, these arguments fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence, and the jury was not swayed. It was clear that Tucker had planned his actions. His obsession had escalated to the point where he was willing to take a life to fix the situation in his mind. After several days of testimony and emotional witness accounts, the jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning with a verdict. Lamondra Marks Tucker was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict was met with a mixture of relief and sorrow. While Tavia's family had fought hard for justice, the reality of the situation was impossible to ignore. No verdict, no punishment could ever bring Tavia back or undo the damage that had been done. The guilty verdict was a moment of accountability for Tucker, but it was also a reminder of the deep pain that remained for the victim's family. The sentencing phase of the trial came shortly after the conviction. In a dramatic moment, the judge handed down the sentence. Tucker was sentenced to death by lethal injection. The courtroom was filled with emotion, and Tavia's family, while grateful for the conviction, was reminded of the harsh reality of their loss. For Vicki Britton, her daughter's killer was now facing the ultimate punishment, but the satisfaction of justice being served was bittersweet. Her daughter would never come back, and the baby that Tavia had dreamed of raising would never take its first steps. Hello to you. Tucker's mother, who had been implicated in a conspiracy to tamper with the jury, also faced charges. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison for her involvement in the case. Her attempt to interfere with the trial only added another layer of heartbreak to an already tragic situation. She, like her son, would now have to answer for her actions, but the question of how much responsibility she bore in the murder of her own daughter's ex-girlfriend remained an open one. As for Marcus Taylor, the man accused of helping Tucker in the murder, his trial was still pending. His role in the crime remained murky, but it was clear that he had played a part in the tragic events that unfolded in September 2008. The full extent of his involvement would eventually be addressed in court, but for now the focus was on Tucker, the man whose actions had cost an innocent woman her life. The trial and sentencing of Lamondra Marks Tucker provided a measure of justice for Tavia Sills and her family, but it was a hollow victory. For Vicki Britton and the rest of Tavia's loved ones, the fight was not over. They had won the battle in the courtroom, but the emotional scars left by Tavia's murder would remain with them for the rest of their lives. The case was a tragic reminder of how love, when distorted by jealousy and obsession, can have devastating consequences. And while Tucker was held accountable for his actions, it would never undo the pain caused by his decision to take Tavia's life. In the wake of the conviction and sentencing of Lamondra Marks Tucker, the emotional ripple effects of Tavia Sills' murder continued to reverberate throughout her family, friends, and the community. The trial, though a step toward justice, did little to ease the overwhelming grief that Tavia's loved ones had to endure. It was a painful reminder that no legal outcome could bring her back or undo the trauma they had all experienced. The aftermath of this tragedy was about more than just the legal proceedings. It was about the long-lasting emotional toll on those who had loved and lost Tavia in such a brutal and senseless way. For Tavia's mother, Vicki Britton, the pain was especially deep. She had always been the pillar of support for her daughter, helping her through the challenges of life, offering guidance and comfort as she navigated the ups and downs of her teenage years and pregnancy. Losing Tavia, her only daughter, was an emotional devastation that no parent should ever have to endure. Though Vicki had publicly forgiven Tucker in the hopes of finding peace within herself, the reality of losing her child was something that would never fully leave her. She was left with an emptiness that no amount of forgiveness or justice could fill. Vicki's strength, however, became a testament to her resilience. Her ability to continue living, to press forward, despite the overwhelming pain, was a powerful and emotional part of the aftermath. While many expected her to focus solely on her anger, her decision to forgive Tucker allowed her to grieve in her own way and seek healing on her terms. In interviews following the trial, Vicki spoke about the difficulty of forgiving someone who had taken so much from her. But she also spoke of how, through forgiveness, she had found the strength to live again. Her message was one of profound love for her daughter and a reminder of the strength that can emerge even in the most tragic of circumstances. The tragedy of Tavia's death also left an indelible mark on her extended family and friends. Tavia's loss was not just felt by her mother but by everyone who had known her. Her family had been left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been violently and prematurely taken. Tavia's close-knit circle of friends, many of whom were also young women facing their own challenges, felt the sting of the loss profoundly. They too had witnessed the slow unraveling of Tavia's relationship with Tucker and the subtle shifts in her demeanor as she grew more fearful and withdrawn. In many ways, Tavia's death felt like a cautionary tale for them all, reminding them of the dangers that can exist in unhealthy relationships, even those that appear to be normal on the surface. For those who had known Tavia before the tragedy, the impact was undeniable. One of the most difficult aspects of the aftermath was the realization that this vibrant young woman, full of life and potential, was now gone. The birth of her child, which she had been looking forward to with such excitement and love, was now a dream that would never be realized. The grief that her friends and family experienced was compounded by the knowledge that Tavia would never get to experience the joys of motherhood. The baby she had so eagerly anticipated would never have the chance to be held by her loving arms. As the case unfolded in the courtroom, Tavia's memory became a focal point for her family and friends. They chose to honor her not just by mourning her loss, but by celebrating the person she had been. Tavia's family, especially her mother, worked tirelessly to keep her memory alive. They held vigils, created memorials, and spoke out about the dangers of domestic violence and the profound impact that jealousy and possessiveness can have in a relationship. They used their voices to raise awareness about the signs of unhealthy relationships, hoping that others might learn from Tavia's story and avoid the tragic fate that had befallen her. The community of Shreveport, too, was deeply impacted by Tavia's death. Shreveport is a close-knit city, and the murder of one of its young residents shook everyone to their core. The community rallied around Tavia's family, offering support in every way they could. Local organizations worked to increase awareness about domestic violence, while others advocated for stronger protective measures for young women in abusive relationships. Tavia's death, while tragic, became a turning point for many in the community. A stark reminder of how a single act of violence can send ripples throughout an entire city. For Lamondra Marks Tucker, the aftermath of his crime was just beginning. His trial and sentencing marked the official end of his role in Tavia's life, but it did not bring closure to the impact he had on so many. Tucker would now face the consequences of his actions for the rest of his life. The jury had found him guilty of first-degree murder, and he had been sentenced to death by lethal injection, but the legal process was far from over. Appeals could be filed, and the lengthy process of appealing a death sentence would mean that Tucker's fate was not sealed just yet. The time that he would spend in prison would be marked by the weight of his actions, and his life, though still in motion, would never be the same. Tucker's mother, who had been convicted of conspiracy to commit jury tampering, also faced her own reckoning. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, a harsh reminder of how her actions had compounded the damage done to Tavia's family. While Tucker faced the ultimate penalty for his crime, his mother's involvement in attempting to undermine the judicial process was a betrayal in and of itself. The fact that she would now spend years in prison for her role in trying to alter the course of justice served as a grim reminder that the consequences of one person's actions can reverberate across generations. But for Tavia's family, the pain of the aftermath was not something they could easily escape. They were left with the haunting reality of a life that was cut short by violence. A young woman who had dreams, hopes, and a bright future ahead of her. The aftermath was not just about the legal consequences for Tucker and his family. It was about the emotional scars left on the people who loved Tavia, scars that would remain for years to come. As the case faded from the headlines, the memory of Tavia Sills lived on in the hearts of her family and friends. She was more than just a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, a sister, and a young woman full of promise. Her death may have marked the end of her story, but the fight for justice and the fight for her memory would continue. And though her life was tragically taken, the lessons learned from her story, a story of obsession, control, and the devastating consequences of jealousy, would stay with those who had been touched by her life forever. As we reach the end of this tragic tale, the story of Tavia Sills serves as a stark reminder of the dark, destructive forces that can emerge in relationships when love is twisted by obsession and control. Tavia was a young woman full of potential, eager to embrace motherhood and life's many possibilities. But her dreams were cruelly stolen from her by someone who could not accept reality. Lamondra Marks Tucker's misguided jealousy and possessiveness led to the loss of not just one life, but two, Tavia's and the child she was carrying. But Tavia's story doesn't end with her murder. Through the pain and the injustice, her family, particularly her mother Vicky Britton, found the strength to forgive and honor her memory. Vicky's unwavering resolve to live again, despite the depths of her grief, is a testament to her strength and resilience. The courage displayed by Tavia's loved ones in the aftermath of such a traumatic loss has given voice to those affected by similar struggles, raising awareness about domestic violence, unhealthy relationships, and the life-altering consequences they can have. Though Tavia is gone, the lessons from her life and death continue to echo. The case serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of recognizing the signs of an unhealthy relationship before it's too late. It highlights the need for support, understanding, and intervention when a loved one is caught in the grip of jealousy, control, or manipulation. It's a call to all of us to speak out, to support those who are vulnerable, and to work toward a future where tragedies like this one are fewer and farther between. As we close this chapter of Tavia's story, we hope that it resonates with all of you. Whether it sparks a conversation about relationships, domestic violence, or the importance of forgiveness and moving forward, let this be a moment where change begins. Tavia's family has chosen to share her story, not just to seek justice but to ensure that others might learn from her experience and never have to face the same fate. They hope that by sharing their pain they can help save someone else's life. Before you go, we want to hear from you. What do you think of Tavia's story? How does her tragic loss resonate with you, and what lessons can we take from her life and death? If you've been affected by domestic violence, if you or someone you know is struggling in an unhealthy relationship, remember that help is out there. You are not alone. We encourage you to reach out to local resources, hotlines, or organizations that provide support for victims of domestic violence. There is always hope, and there are always people willing to listen and help. No one deserves to live in fear, and everyone deserves the chance to live their life free from control, abuse, or manipulation. If Tavia's story has touched you, if you believe that more needs to be done to prevent these kinds of tragedies from occurring, then we urge you to share this video. Share it with your friends, your family, and your community. Use it as a conversation starter to bring awareness to the realities of domestic violence, and encourage others to speak up, support victims, and stand up against abuse. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you can stay informed about more true crime stories that matter.